Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Daryl Henry. I'm the Executive Director of the Western Caucus Foundation, and this is part one in our series of DC Connect, our Digital Connect programming that we've started this year for the Western Caucus Foundation. And today we're going to be working on a rural broadband forum. This is an issue that has come up several times in previous forums, and certainly our rural health forum earlier this year. And it's something that's getting more attention, and the need has just become more urgent given school closures and rural health issues and all that. So we have a great panel lined up today, but I will first, I believe, turn it over to our co-chair from the Congressional Western Caucus, Chairman Paul Gosar of Arizona.
Hey, thank you, Daryl. Paul Gosar, the Congressional Western Caucus, and I want to thank the Foundation for putting this on and for everybody chiming in. Today, our focus is on rural broadband and the important role technology connections can have for rural America. Increasingly, the technological divide between rural America, urban and suburban America is growing. It is similar to the challenge we faced with rural electrification a century ago. Access to broadband high-speed internet is essential to daily life in America. From education to healthcare, the workplace to entertainment, America's need is to be connected. The COVID pandemic has accelerated this challenge as employers in some sectors transitioned their workers from on-site work to telework. Schools distance learning and doctors moved from in-person to these radical United States, particularly rural areas, have either limited or no access to broadband infrastructure. These changes are simply impossible to make. In 2019, the FCC estimated that there were 21.3 million Americans who lack a connection that enables a download rate of at least 25 megabits per second and an upload rate of 3 megabits per second. To fix this challenge, we have federal agencies such as the FCC, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and the Rural Utility Service. Two of these agencies are joining us today. These agencies have both the mission and the directed resources to help bridge the digital divide by driving the broadband infrastructure build out. One area I'm focused on is reaching out all households in America. Working with my Western colleague, Scott Tipton, I am sponsoring an amendment that will prioritize federal funds to be used to build non-existent broadband infrastructure to our unconnected communities before building up and updating already connected communities. This will ensure that we are focused on getting a minimal level of broadband to all households before giving gold-plated service to fewer hard-to-reach neighborhoods. That said, I will now pass it back off to Senator Daines. Steve on?
Hi, this is Joshua with Senator Daines' office. He is not quite on yet. He's joining here in just a second. We're getting them all set up.
Joshua, do we want to go to Commissioner Carr and then Senator Daines can speak the back end, or is he almost ready to go?
I think that would be good. Let's turn it over to Commissioner Carr for his remarks, and then we can come back with Senator Daines.
Terrific. I'd like to introduce Commissioner Brendan Carr of the FCC. Thank you for joining us here today. Look forward to your comments. Appreciate that.
Yeah, glad to do it. Can everyone hear me? Do I have my mic on right? Hopefully. Well, it's a pleasure to join the Western Caucus. I think what we just heard from the congressman, what we'll hear from the senator, is something that we are laser focused at the FCC on, which is how do we close the digital divide? How do we make sure that every single community in this country has a fair shot at next generation connectivity? High-speed internet services, as we just heard, is really table stakes, whether it's participating in the economy, whether it's educating our kids, whether it's accessing telehealth. And I think as we sort of heard a little bit about, COVID-19 put our internet infrastructure through really a surprise and an unprecedented stress test. You know, in the days that sort of lockdown orders went into place and as people shifted their lives inside the home, we saw really significant spikes in internet traffic, something in the order of 20 to 30% on wired networks in particular. In the U.S., internet infrastructure held up exceptionally well. And unfortunately, our global counterparts in Europe and other parts of the world, including China, their networks did not hold up as well. They saw much more, one measures internet pressure, others are speeds, latency. Our networks stayed up to speed much better. These are regimes that have had, whether Europe or otherwise, a much heavier-handed approach to the internet. So this was really, putting our telecom policies in the U.S. into a crucible and boiling away what's not important from what is important. And as we've heard, what's more important than ever before is getting this digital divide closed. We wasted, unfortunately, a lot of time in this country during the last administration pursuing just partisan political agendas in telecom that literally had nothing to do with connecting communities, building out internet infrastructures. Net neutrality was chief among those, and we've turned the page on that. We are now making more progress than ever before in closing the digital divide. It narrowed by about 30% over the first couple of years of this administration. Internet speeds are up, and we are now leading the world in 5G. We've got 5G live in communities across the country, and none of this is to say that we are waving the mission accomplished flag. Nothing could be further from the truth. It emphasizes the need to go further. If the town down the street, down the road, has received high-speed internet and your town hasn't, it doesn't feel like we're making any progress in this country. The data is clear that we are, but we need to keep the pedal down until we extend internet infrastructure to every single community. As the congressman noted, how we define broadband makes a difference too. We see some people that are advocating for definitions and approaches that would end up gold plating communities that already have service. Take a place that has 20 megabits of service today, more than enough for Netflix and Zoom and everything, and get them 100 megabits. And my approach is how to make sure that everybody, first of all, gets to that high speed service before we move our attention to gold plating areas that already do. And I had a chance to spend a lot of time in Montana, some which with Senator Daines, was in Missoula all the way up to Great Falls. And that drive is one of the most beautiful drives that I've been through in this country, but it's also one of the worst cell phone experiences that I've had, the longest time with 0 bars. And so that underscores the need for us to keep moving. And we're doing a couple things. We've freed up more spectrum to help enable the private sector to carry these 4G and 5G services. We've done a lot of work on infrastructure. I've been leading the FCC's work on this to drive down the cost of building out internet infrastructure. We've engaged in reforms from environmental to historic review to putting some guardrails on the state and local processes. And those are part of why our internet infrastructure is as robust as it was during COVID-19. And there's more to do. Federal lands continues to be an issue. As those of you in the Western Caucus know, the further west you go, the higher percentage of lands are owned by the federal government. It can still be a challenge to permit and site and build internet infrastructure in federal land. So there may be opportunities there. Some of that is outside our authority at the FCC to Congress to continue to look at how we can do even better on siting on federal lands. And of course, we're working on secure networks. I was in a small town, Belfry, Montana, at a cell site that was running on Huawei gear. And when I was up in Malmstrom Air Force Base, there are cell towers dotted throughout that big sky country that are running on Huawei gear. And so we've taken some actions at the FCC to address that. And we're currently also considering whether we need to rip and replace some of that gear that's already out there in the networks. And finally, workforce. We need a skilled workforce to build out and complete this 5G build. So I put out a jobs initiative that looks to community colleges. We can take someone with no skills and go through an 8 to 12-week community college program, and they can land a good paying job, building out internet infrastructure, whether it's climbing cell towers or otherwise. And those are $60,000 a year jobs with pretty quick upward mobility to 100,000. So I think as we look at COVID relief packages and how to get Americans back to work, one thing we should also consider is how we can support those community college programs so people can go right in 6 to 8 weeks and then get right back in the workforce, because there's very, very high demand right now for these tower climbers and other workers. So really great to join the caucus. So glad that you're focused on this vitally important issue, and happy to stick around for some questions later.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr. Now hold on just a few minutes. I'm sure we'll have some questions. Do you want to go to Senator Daines? Is Senator Daines there?
The senator is still, we're still trying to get him on. Congressman, if we could go to our next speaker, that would be great, sir.
Okay. It's now my honor to introduce our next guest, the Administrator of the Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service, Mr. Chad Roop. Administrator Roop previously served as Wyoming State Director, a state that has real broadband challenges for many of its communities, kind of like Arizona, for the past 2 years, and we're excited for him to join us here today. Administrator Roop, the floor is yours. I hope I said your name right. Administrator Roop, the floor is yours. Administrator Roop, you're up.
We see you, Administrator. We can't hear you. If you can undo your mic.
If there's a problem with his connection, hopefully you don't blame the FCC for that one.
Your mic seems to be on, Administrator. I think he's working through a little bandwidth issue there.
If you need to fill in, I can offer some riffs on some other interesting ideas. We can get into some China issues, national security. I can offer up some dad jokes if that'll help pass the time.
Yeah, no, we're giving him a minute here, and we may have to go to our next speaker, give him a chance to come back to us with his through the technical stuff. So I know Senator Daines wanted to introduce Stacy Mueller from Blackfoot Communications in Missoula, Montana. Mr. Roop, if you're gonna, we'll may pause and come back to you once you get your stuff together. Joshua, I'm assuming the senator isn't there, so Stacy, why don't we jump to you, and then we'll come back to Administrator Roop.
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on this panel and to represent Blackfoot Communications. For those of you that don't know, I mean, Commissioner Carr, I know you were through here and probably met our CEO, and he's, you got the #2 here, so I'm pinch hitting here, but Montana, we're a Montana-based company. We also have customers in Idaho. We're a rural telco. We've got about 13,500 residential customers in Montana and Idaho that we provide broadband and telephone services for. And we also have a CLEC. We have about 5,000 customers there in Montana and Idaho that are represented with different offices in about 18 states. But I'd say when you look at a map and you see the geography of Montana, I'm sure you get right away how rural we are. The challenges we have are not only the density. I mean, we might have 1 to 2 people per square mile in many parts of our service territory. It's a very large geographic area, which makes the economics for providing broadband connections challenging, which is why we rely on the USF, and we are very thankful. Our cooperative, we are a cooperative, we're owned by our members in the state of Montana, would not exist without that support. We're very thankful for the FCC, the reformation of the program, and we are an ACAM selected provider in 2017, and that increased support is helping us go back to our entire service area in Montana and into Idaho and deploy more fiber and to upgrade our facilities and to bring more broadband. So that's a really important program that we're obviously in full support of. The other challenge briefly that we have here is not just our large geography, but it's also our topography. We're in mountains, we got granite, it's much more challenging, it's more expensive. Because boring through granite is a whole nother ball game compared to sand. and trying to go over mountains. So it prohibits us from some of certain different technologies that you might be able to use in the very flat land of maybe Nebraska or something. So it does provide lots of challenges, but we're up for that, and we do our best to provide great service for our people. Now, but I really wanted to touch on the COVID response a bit and the impacts on our communities and on Blackfoot as a company. I would like to say that we fully support the KCCA, the Keeping Critical Connections Act. I think, you know, I'm sure you're going to work through it and have challenges with it, but it really speaks to a lot of what we're seeing as impacts locally, not only to our company, but for our customers in these rural areas and communities. So let me start real briefly with schools. First off, in our service territory for Blackfoot, every one of our 100% of our schools are fiber fed. So we don't have that hurdle to deal with. We're able to work with the schools easily. In fact, that helped us because some of the schools working with us during the COVID pandemic here early on wanted to provide Wi-Fi hotspots for community access in some of these rural communities. And so we did that. We upgraded their speeds. We've been providing the equipment and all of the hotspots in several communities, allowing people to come into their parking lots essentially and use their facilities. Now that's not ideal. We don't want kids sitting in parking lots doing their homework. And so we went the next step, and working locally directly with the schools has been fantastic. And I'm not alone. I think when I represent much of the small rural telcos, my cohorts are doing the same things I'm talking about. So it's not just a Blackfoot thing. But the schools were able to connect us directly with families and with some teachers, believe it or not, that did not have internet access at the time all of this hit. And we got with those families, working through the school. And in our service territory, we're able to provide internet access to all of them right away. And we've been providing free access for them through the summertime. We're right now working with our schools for their fall implementations. As you can expect, many of them are wrestling right now with how much they're going to do remote. And so we're starting to gear up. So I think we're going to see more of that going into the fall, which is why I think the KCCA can be really helpful. The other part of the KCCA, and I'm over my time, I'm sorry, I'll just say this one thing, is on the low-income customers. So we did sign the pledge, obviously, to not disconnect customers through this time. We haven't disconnected any residential customers since March. But a lot of these folks have racked up bills now for 4 or 5 months. And as you know, in rural communities, a lot of rural communities have a large number of people living at the poverty line or below. So many of these folks, now they've got 4 or 5 months, are not going to be able to pay that bill. And so we are going to start working with them on payment plans, but some aren't even going to be able to do that. So we are going to have to be writing off some of these services. And I do think that we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that going forward as well, because we need these people to be connected. They have the ability to be through our services, but a lot of them don't have the financial means. So I know I'm over my time, so I'll leave it at that. There are some other impacts I think that we need to consider going forward on the businesses that aren't going to show up on our income statements for probably 6 to 12 months. We're starting to see slow pays on a lot of small businesses, but I've taken too much time, so I will leave it at that. And thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Great, thanks for joining us. Congressman, I think you're on mute.
You want to introduce Mr. Watson? I'm Mr. Mueller.
Do we have Mr. Watson or Mr. Mueller? Mr. Watson or Mr. Roop back on, Administrator Roop?
Hi, this is Chad Roop. I apologize. My computer got rebooted as soon as I went to speak, so I went from great connectivity to no connectivity, but I was able to call in, so hopefully you're able to hear me, and I apologize for the connection issue. Believe me, we will continue to fight through this issue, whether it's locally or nationally, so I apologize for the delay. If I may, I'd just like to give you guys an update on where we are and some of the major happenings within USDA. At the end of June, we released a report that recapped our Reconnect Round 1 awards, where we invested in 82 projects with over $744 million worth of grant and loan funding across 34 states. And that report is available on our website at reconnect.usda.gov. And our round one investments will benefit close to 22,000 farms and businesses and over 560 critical community facilities, as well as educational and healthcare centers. And I think that's important to note that we're not just trying to get people connected at home, but this has obviously, as the COVID crisis has warranted, major impact on all of our ability to do business, whether it be farm production, ranching, small business, as well as healthcare and distance learning. And as you guys are well aware, we received $100 million through the CARES Act, and we're using that $100 million to be able to invest in 100% grant projects that did not receive funding in round one, who decided to reapply in round two, and who would qualify as a result of our change in rules between round one and round two, where we brought all of our categories back in line together to be 90% unserved households at least 10-1, and then promising to build out to 25-3. We received 11 applications for round one, and the great news is that we've been obligated 9 out of the 11 CARES Act applications for round two, and we made 2 announcements on those awards. The first one was in Georgia on July 25th for $12.5 million, and then on July 14th, the Secretary announced the first award of Reconnect in the state of Mississippi for $16 million. And our team's working right now very feverishly on the remaining 172, of the 172 applications less the 9, so 163 applications with the boots on the ground service area validation that is required before we make a determination on an award for the $1.57 billion in requests we received. We plan to have all of those awards determined by September 1st. I think that's very important that we be able to do that, because just as we're talking about coordination of effort and understand who's served and unserved, we have a great relationship with the FCC, and we want to continue to build on that relationship with them. We meet monthly with them, and we're very willing to share the information on our awards as they get ready to go through this process for the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. So we have good, strong data on where we're building out, where our applicants and awardees are planning to build out, and we want to be able to share that with our federal partners so we can all make good quality decisions. And this impacts, obviously, our capacity to build out precision ag. But I'd like to transition just for a moment before we start talking about a little bit of the bigger picture, is to zone in on our distance learning and telemedicine grant program. We received an additional $25 million in CARES Act funding for that program, and it allowed us to establish a second window this fiscal year that ended July 13th. And as we talked about with the dire need as evidenced by the COVID crisis, we were very oversubscribed for that application window. We received 534 applications for $252 million in requests for grant funding. And just as a side note, earlier this year, when we did our first window, which is our normal regular window for distance learning and telemedicine, where we had about 71 million available, we received 253 applications for 143 million. So to be very clear, we are very oversubscribed by at least $200 million in eligible applications for distance learning and telemedicine throughout the nation. So I thought it was important to point that out, that we are working very hard to make sure that we do everything that we are congressionally appropriated to do to meet the needs of the people who are applying for service out there. And I will add a point that is going to kind of tie all this together. In smart utility, in accordance with the 2018 Farm Bill, we're working on their smart utility regulation, which is going to allow us to use 10% of our funding in all of our rural development projects for broadband purposes. And we believe that smart utility regulation is going to be a great pathway for building out middle mile infrastructure and connecting all of rural America's unconnected communities. So we're hoping to have this regulation published by this fall. And I think it's very important to point out the benefit that this brings. Our electric cooperatives, our investor-owned utilities, and our public power utilities and authorities can use the extra dark fiber capacity for smart utility with their fiber lines to be able to help build that backbone communication needed for getting to the communities and partnering with telecoms so that everybody can win and everybody can engage in this modern economy. It's very important that we have that backbone infrastructure, whether it be for last mile wireless connections or if it's for last mile retail fiber connections. We want to make sure that people have the capacity to do what's needed to be done, because we will never get to 5G if we don't have that backbone in place. We will also never get to experience the benefit of everything that precision agriculture can do to feed and fuel and clothe the world unless we have that backbone infrastructure in place. And that model is very, very important to be able to do whatever we decide to do to get people connected with the last mile. So we are actively engaged in doing everything we can to help contribute to the solution to this problem. So again, I apologize for the connection. Hopefully you can see me again. I don't know if you can, but at least you can hear my voice and hear what I have to say. So thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Mr. Roop. It is now my pleasure, Mr. Greg Watson on the line.
Hey there, yes, this is Greg Watson. I apologize, I'm unable to join by video today. There's restrictions
Mr. Watson?
on
Introduce
yes, Chairman, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, sorry, I'm
I can hear you.
unable to join unable to join by video today. There's some restrictions on what EOP can use in terms of video enabled services, but pleased to be here by phone. And thanks again, Chairman Gosar, for the introduction, and thank you to Chairman Daines and the Western Caucus Foundation for inviting me to be here with you all today for this important conversation. It's my pleasure to be here with Administrator Roop, Commissioner Carr, as well as panelists from the private sector who are actually helping get Americans connected, Mrs. Mueller and Mrs. Robinson. As a former staffer to a member of the Congressional Western Caucus, I appreciate the work you all do to inform policy discussions in Washington. When it comes to broadband access, there's no question of its importance, a fact that only has been underscored by COVID-19. From the earliest days of his administration, increasing access to broadband has been a top priority for President Trump. Today, I'd like to focus my remarks on the administration's interagency efforts to increase access to rural broadband through the American Broadband Initiative and highlight just some of its key accomplishments. Following the President's executive order and presidential memorandum to expedite broadband deployment on federal lands in 2018, the White House launched the American Broadband Initiative as the administration's signature interagency strategy to increase access to broadband across America. More than 20 federal agencies participate in ABI, and NTIA and USDA are its co-chairs. The objective is simple: identify barriers that hinder broadband deployment and eliminate them in order to spur increased investment from the private sector and ensure the federal government is using its limited resources most effectively. One of the main pillars of ABI is the work stream to streamline federal permitting. The federal government owns roughly 640 million acres, which is nearly 30% of all the total land in the United States. And as you all know well, a large portion of that land is in western states. Our emphasis on federal permitting has yielded results. Through collaboration between GSA and the Forest Service, we've created a new single common application form known as the SF-299 for broadband providers to cite all forms of communications equipment and infrastructure on all federal lands and rights of way. And recently, the Bureau of Land Management created an electronic version of this form so that broadband providers can submit applications and store filing information online. This is the first time that this service has been made available to the industry for broadband permitting, and we have more agencies will take steps towards adopting this capability. The Department of Interior has also created a public inventory known as the Joel Map of over 7,000 DOI-owned towers that can be used to site communications infrastructure. This type of information is particularly useful for providers to speed deployment in rural and western states. By making it easier for private industry to co-locate at existing facilities or build out new broadband infrastructure on public lands, the federal government can play a strong role in increasing connectivity across all corners of the United States. These are just some examples of the straightforward common sense reforms that we've made to cut red tape and accelerate broadband deployment. Hopefully also of interest to this audience is the reestablishment of the White House Council on Native American Affairs, which OSTP is pleased to serve as a member. In addition to leading COVID-19 interagency response coordination with Indian country, the Council will help drive administration policy priorities supporting Indian country, including economic development and rural prosperity, which broadband access is clearly essential to. COVID-19 has underscored the importance of a home broadband connection as millions of families have transitioned temporarily to work, learn, and receive healthcare remotely. The Trump administration is committed to its work through the American Broadband Initiative and related efforts to ensure more Americans have access to digital opportunity. We welcome the opportunity to hear from you and other stakeholders across the country as we continue our work on behalf of all Americans. If you have any questions or would like any information on any of the issues, please don't hesitate to contact me directly, and I look forward to any questions you might have during Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. Josh, just checking in with Senator Daines. How are we doing there? I know how he thinks people get torn away. So
Yeah, not quite yet. We're still hoping to get them on in time, though.
no worries, no worries. Okay. Then I will just jump in here and take the honor of introducing Vicki Robinson, Director of the Airband Initiative with Microsoft, to kind of fill us in on their new work that they're doing. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and appreciation to the chair and to the foundation for the opportunity to participate in today's panel and forum with such esteemed panelists. I think we can all agree, and Representative Gosar sort of referenced this fact as part of his opening remarks, that broadband is the electricity of the 21st century, fueling enormous economic and social opportunities, whether it's starting or growing a small business, to supporting virtual learning and telemedicine, or driving innovation in agriculture. And while we as a country have made significant strides to unleash the power of broadband, the reality is that the digital divide persists, with millions of Americans lacking access to meaningful broadband, and the majority of which reside in rural areas. And so what Microsoft has done to kind of step up to this challenge is launch the Airband Initiative as both a call to action and our programmatic effort to help close the rural broadband access gap here in the United States. The Airband Initiative supports use of a hybrid technology model that leverages a combination of both fixed wireless connectivity alongside wired connectivity options to extend broadband. Central to this work is our commitment to work with internet service providers and others to extend broadband access to 3 million people residing in unserved rural areas, and to do so by July of 2022. We are delivering on this commitment by partnering with a network of people and organizations that are all really working toward the same goal, and that is to connect people and bring the connectivity, with that connectivity, the opportunity for a better life. As part of our work, we are currently partnering with 13 internet service providers to extend rural broadband access in 25 states and Puerto Rico, and we have helped to stand up pilot projects in an additional 3 states. Through these projects, we have extended access to more than 3 million people who were previously in rural, unserved areas, and we're moving full steam ahead to accelerate our work even further. As Airband communities come online, we're working to empower consumers, educational institutions, healthcare providers, our nation's veterans, and others to fully unlock the transformational potential of broadband access. One of our most recent partnerships is with the company Treasure State Internet and Telegraph, or TSI, who are locally owned and operated and serving customers in the Helena, Montana area and surrounding regions. As part of our work together with TSI, they will leverage both fiber optic as well as wireless technologies to expand broadband access to a little over 125,000 people who are currently without access in the state of Montana. And this, to me, is a great example of what's possible by leveraging a hybrid technology model to really attack the problem. As we ourselves are convening virtually, I would be remiss not to acknowledge the economic and social ramifications of the COVID-19 crisis, which really, in my mind, lay bare the fact that even in the best of times, many people in rural and underserved areas do not have vital broadband access that is essential for modern life. So what we have done, and Stacey has spoken to this, we've kind of worked with our Airband partners to take various steps to address the broadband gap during the crisis, including the construction of hundreds of public Wi-Fi hotspots to provide community service that enable things like distance learning, telemedicine, and filling out of critical forms such as unemployment applications, and otherwise facilitating other necessary online activity. And while this is imperfect, you kind of have to, it is something that's important and key to address the immediate need that we find ourselves in. We're also advocating for policies that provide more funding to schools and communities to essentially sort of remove roadblocks so that broadband can reach unserved and underserved communities more quickly. We're deeply encouraged by the efforts underway in the Congress and elsewhere to develop solutions that address not just the immediate need, but also create long-term solutions to ultimately close the digital divide. And we as a country have come a long way, but there is still work that remains to realize our shared vision of ubiquitous access to broadband. But we believe that together we do more, and our hope is that we want to impact the lives of millions of people in the US who are currently without access by providing broadband access, and in the process, improving the livelihood of people in rural and underserved communities. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity again to participate in the forum and look forward to continued dialogue and engagement with the foundation.
Terrific. So, Chairman Gosar, you want to introduce our next guest?
Big, Ms. Robinson, we appreciate your conversation. Is Senator Daines? Is it Senator Daines? Is he there yet?
Not yet, sir.
Or is it Congressman Dusty Johnson?
Congressman
Either one of
Johnson.
those two.
Hey
on?
there. Yeah, Dusty Johnson's here. Of course, I defer to the senator if he's on.
Daryl?
Congressman Johnson, please.
Dusty?
Yeah, well, hey, thank you very much for the time. And this whole topic is a personal
you're on, Dusty.
Senator Johnson, Congressman Johnson. We had you, then we lost you. Congressman Johnson, you unmute. We see you're on.
Oh, here we go. Let's try now. Sorry,
There you go, sir. There you go.
kept pressing *6, but for whatever reason, the first and second time it didn't take. But here we are now. Thanks, everybody, for your time. I've been really enjoying listening to the conversation. This is a personal passion of mine. Some of you know before I came to Congress, I was the co-owner of an engineering and consulting firm that built broadband networks. We designed and built about 8,000 miles of fiber optic network a year. I was the vice president of the business unit that provided a lot of business and regulatory counsel to about 400 rural independent telcos who were doing business, some of them in the most rural of spaces. And so this is a personal passion of mine, and I just have loved all the information we've heard so far. I think the one thing I want to highlight for you all is a piece of legislation that is being introduced tomorrow by Abigail Spanberger, Virginia Democrat, and myself. They would provide an additional $200 to the Federal Communications Commission on the telehealth initiative. This would really mirror the efforts that was made in the CARES Act, and those dollars went very quickly. I'm sure many of you remember that those dollars were to allow healthcare providers to make some additional investments in telehealth, whether that was, funding patients' telecom services or information services or devices during the pandemic, so we could maintain that connectivity, made sure that telehealth was able to step up and fill the void during those difficult times. Those dollars went very quickly, as Commissioner Carr and others, I'm sure, could tell us. At some point, awards were limited to $1 million, but they were still substantially oversubscribed. So given how successful that program was and how well executed it was by FCC, the Congresswoman Spanberger and I wanted to have a placeholder out there, so as additional discussions take place on the next package, that people understand that this is an area that is worthy of investment. So I won't burn any more time than is necessary. Of course, if there are questions or comments or indictments, I'm happy to stand by, and just really, really appreciate Western Caucus pulling this together.
Great, thanks, Congressman. We're being joined by Michelle on our team, who's going to kind of offer up some questions for the group that we've had come in.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking through our broadband issues that we've had so far today. So our first question, I'd like to send it over to Commissioner Carr. We've heard today that broadband can be provided in many ways, from wireless,
Wait,
TV.
Michelle, hold on. Congressman Gosar, you're a bit of a lag here, but I see you trying to speak. Okay, Michelle, go ahead.
All right, so we've heard today that our broadband can be provided in many ways, from wireless, TV white space, our rural electric providers, satellite. So how can we best coordinate those resources that are focused on deploying the most reliable and least expensive options for a particular area or region?
And this was one reason why I'm so excited about the future of connectivity in this country, because we are, we've talked about this concept of convergence for a long time. We were actually truly seeing convergence. So 5G, one interesting element of 5G is that for the first time, you can now get wirelessly the same speed, latency, and quality of service that before required a fixed or landline connection. You've got this new generation of low Earth orbit satellites that are going up that could make particular headway in closing the digital divide in rural communities at a very low cost rate. And so I think you've got all of these technologies that are now competing. And so we're trying to make sure that, look, as we look at closing that digital divide, that we're open to any type of technology that can get the job done, rather than putting a thumb in favor of one technology or the other. So I do think going forward, there's going to be a mix of technologies that both compete generally, but also solve that last mile problem in a way that could be more affordable. Because again, we spend roughly $10 billion a year supporting the build out of internet infrastructure. And we are about to spend an additional large chunk of money to get this job done. But if we can get technologies that are more affordable, we have mechanisms in place so that providers can bid down, lower the funding that we spend while still closing the digital divide.
Great, thank you. Our next question, I'm going to direct over to Stacy Mueller from Blackfoot. So Stacy, Blackfoot has a wide reach in rural Montana. What are some of the actions that Congress or the administration can take to help speed up the broadband deployment in the West and in your region?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, the step they did take, the FCC actually took with the ACAM model and updating that model was a big step in the right direction. Of course, that funding isn't enough to build out. If you just take one of our exchanges, for example, one of our largest exchanges, it's still not enough in some areas to build it out completely to the extent we need. And so the business case isn't there. So I would say take the programs that are already there. There's the RUS, I think there's the RDOF, there's the ACAM USF model, and we need to find ways to be able to deploy more funds and to open some of those areas up that have the most need. And some of those areas, frankly, are outside of our service area. There's areas that are around us that are more remote, and they may have a provider that is no longer investing there. And so maybe the RDOF and some of these other programs can address some of that. So I think that's one of the main things we can do.
Do others want to jump in on this in the previous question? Administrator Roop?
Yes. First of all, on the previous question, I think it's important that we engage all technologies, as the commissioner said, but I also think it's important that we're prudent with taxpayer dollars from a standpoint of ensuring that we have commercially scale and commercially viable technologies that are proven. So we're wise with our taxpayer funds, and we ensure that we understand all of the needs of the community to build it right the first time and not have to go in and rebuild something just a few years later after we've spent federal dollars. I think those are important considerations to take into account as we move forward. So I fully support what the commissioner says and embrace it, but I also think it's important that we're good bankers as we move forward as well with investor and public funds as we try to solve these issues. On the second item, I think it's important that we do a good job of marketing our programs that we have available, and to let people know that we are serious about getting out and doing business. So we've got 47 state directors located throughout the United States that are very ready to engage with the people who do this for a living and make sure that we market our programs appropriately so that they're aware of everything that we can bring to the table to help solve the issue and be a good partner, whether we're involved in the actual final discussion or we're just a quarterback, if you will, trying to direct the play of the game. So we're there to be able to be of assistance and help bridge the gap.
And if I might, I think the only thing that I would add for consideration is, and I think it's implicit in the remarks that's the comments that have been shared thus far, and it's really in response to the first question, is that it's important to be technology neutral, and I think that that's really kind of built into the existing mechanisms and policies. And we need to, really recognize that in some instances, it's going to make more sense to leverage wireless technologies, whether you're talking about 5G or you're talking about technologies like television white spaces, or it could be something else. The important thing that I think that we want to optimize for is what's going to be cost effective in a given geography and speed to actually deploy. And I think we can all sort of agree that rural America has waited much too long, and we should optimize our policies in such a way where we're seeking to be cost effective and quick to address the problem.
Great. I might also add on the congressional action front, we just heard we have two members that have bills coming forward. So
can I add just something on the technology neutral front? Because I completely agree with that, but there's challenges in it as well. So, in our service territory, we're not going to be able, we don't have fiber to everybody yet, obviously, and we're working towards that on fiber to the prem. But in the meantime, we've got plans, we're building things out over the next 5 to 10 years. We look at all the time, we're always looking for the most cost-effective way to get service to a customer. And so we deploy a lot of other technologies as well, like RF. We've taken our copper and bonding and trying to get speeds to where we can. And but that's a challenge because it's only in limited pockets in our geography. It comes back again to our topography and where we live. And so I agree with what everybody is saying completely. I just want to remind folks that sometimes there isn't another technology that can get to some of these places. And in the meantime, while some of our exchanges that are going to get built out later down the road, we have been able to do other things so that they're not lacking. They have access to high-speed internet before the fiber actually comes to their home. But I mean, that's the challenge even in our own company, is we're member owned, and each exchange has a voice. And one exchange just got fiber and the other one's 5 years down the plant road, and we're trying to balance all of that too and be cost effective with the government's money. So I just wanted to throw that out there because there's not a simple solution in technology neutral, I should say.
Great, awesome. Thank you for collaborating on that. So one last question that we do have, I'd like to direct to Congressman Johnson if he's still on the phone, and to Congressman Gosar. So for WAPA, it's reported to be completing a study relating to the possibility of leasing broadband among transmission lines. To what degree have you been working with WAPA on this? And do you see this coming to fruition without congressional authority for the PMA?
Is Dusty, are you on? I take it he isn't. They're about ready to take off for votes. We have not had a chance to really work with WAPA, but it is an opportunity to actually facilitate that. As many of you may know, WAPA has been in my sights because we've been trying to direct WAPA instead of having full-time equivalents and needless spending aspects. We've been trying to keep them under par. But this is one of the issues, along with resilience in regards to energy. They need to have the duplicity in regards to a backup system. And in order to meet their electrical and energy needs. So this would be a great application of the dual applications along common corridor. So it's a like the people have said, everything's on the table.
Congressman, we're losing you.
Everybody.
I think we're having some more technical issues. So I'm going to wrap our program at that. If you do have any questions remaining, please send them to the foundation and we will get them answered in a timely manner. In the meantime, a lot of other people are having technical issues. So thank you for those who are able to join. Thank you to all of our featured speakers. Again, if you have any questions for them or content for them, please reach out to us and we will connect you. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.